Chapter 1183, and now after Golden Week followed by this more recent break week, we should be resuming regular scheduling after a kind of stop-start month, but it wasn't so bad since the scale of everything meant there was a lot to discuss and think about, and one thing you can always count on is that each chapter is going to be as dense as Oda can possibly make it anyway. I'm gonna call this the beginning of round 3 for this fight, this plan, this invasion, whatever from Imu and the Holy Knights. Round 1 was when they initially kicked off the game to kidnap the kids, round 2 was when Imu descended in Gunko's body, and this is round 3 with Imu's real descent and the Holy Knights being boosted. Like a boss fight in a video game, each round, each level introduces something new and is noticeably harder than before. So this chapter is round 3 of Elbaf versus the world government. Back to the main event, Loki versus Imu continues. This is the third chapter I think since the fight began, which obviously isn't that long, but considering it's now been a couple chapters since we saw Luffy in the scene where he said he had to be at 100% for this fight, implying that this guy is still eating right now. So all the other times that Luffy ran out of energy in a fight and needed to eat to get himself up and about again, where he definitely wasn't eating for this long, maybe he wasn't eating to get to full strength but was eating to get to passable fighting condition, like up to 60-70%, I don't know. I'm not gonna stop power scaling Luffy's eating habits. And also when we saw Loki challenging Imu first, I thought we would go a maximum of like 2 chapters before Luffy joined the fight himself, so now I'm wondering how many more there will be until he actually does, not counting any flashback chapters considering how we finish things off in this chapter. I have seen a cool idea though that probably isn't the case, but I like it anyway, that with Luffy's powers being based on imagination, maybe it's working to his detriment this time, where maybe he's already eaten enough food to be at 100%, but after feeling Imu's haki, he's imagining and thinking to himself that he needs more food to fight somebody that strong, so he keeps eating because in his own mind he hasn't eaten enough yet. So he doesn't feel at full strength even though he already is. Again, I doubt this is actually what's happening here, but I still like the idea. And instead of saying Loki versus Imu, I should be saying Loki and Ragnia versus Imu, because yes, you can include Ragnia as a part of Loki's moveset, his arsenal, who just won the Premier League. The whole world weeps with sadness. Anyway, the world also keeps going, so we saw Imu personally acknowledge Ragnia's presence here in the fight while also referencing their shared past, which arguably runs deeper than Loki's connection to Imu, which is through the death of his father Harald. So Ragnia deserves individual recognition here, and Imu's having a full-on conversation here. He knows Ragnia's waited all this time for a new master for centuries, maybe kind of insulting him in a way to say that you need somebody else there for you to be able to do anything substantial, which would make this situation even funnier because it means he's actively rage baiting a squirrel. He then says Luffy and Loki were never going to serve him, further confirmation that when he tried to Domi Reversi them earlier, it was more of a nothing attempt. There's nothing to lose by trying, so might as well give it a go even if it doesn't work, even if he knows it's not gonna work. Loki says he's not faced anybody this tough, which isn't a surprise. This is Imu, who even Shanks can't match up to, assuming those two did actually fight when he was brought back to Elbaf, and there's really no one Loki could ever face in the future who would be a harder fight than Imu besides Luffy or Blackbeard, which is a confrontation I want to see, not only because of my belief that the final war is going to be a triple threat between us, the government, and Blackbeard, but also he's the son of Zebek, so I want to see how Loki interacts with him, how such a meeting would go. Would Loki see Blackbeard as a disgrace to his father's name? Here with Imu though, it's becoming clear to me that even though he told the elders that they need to start taking things seriously, while it was a general statement, it was for them more so. They need to take this 100% seriously, and while Imu also is being more serious because he's entered the fray personally, it feels like that's the limit of his seriousness for now, because it seems as though he's not playing with Loki but having fun with him. He isn't going all out, and the main thing here is that Imu says that the two of them, Luffy and Loki, will die just as Dozan did. That's one more name to add to the, I'm guessing, Void Century collection, with many more to come, because this is 100 years of history wiped out. There's gonna be a ton of named characters from that era. Although my first thought was that this is a name I've heard before somewhere else in One Piece, but what I was actually thinking about was the hammerhead sharkfish man called Dosen. Oh, I doubt there's any greater connection there, but it's still interesting because in Fishman Island we also have the mermaid quintuplet kids, one of whom is named Nika, while another background character in the arc has a shirt with the name Zaza written on it. So maybe the Fishman Island arc is a hidden treasure trove for major details that we just can't see yet. And as for the first genuine candidate for who I think this name belongs to, based on the fact that it's Loki and Ragnia that Imu's currently fighting, so it would make sense, is the God of War, Ragnia's former companion and the former user of the Needhog fruit, or who just naturally had those Needhog abilities without the fruit if he's the OG God of War. And I'm also assuming that that we are talking about this guy from Yarul's mind, this is Dozan, where there's still a chance either way that this could be a fight against Nika in the first world or Joyboy during the Void Century. And the name does have meaning, but first in Japanese, the name Dozan seems to mean mountain peak or mountain road, which doesn't seem to be relevant. The only connection I can see there is that mountains are big and giants are also big, you may have noticed, but that's a very loose connection. It doesn't seem like some kind of Japanese onomatopoeia to go along with the naming schemes of Nika and Zaza, although to that point I feel like the God of War is kind of distinct from those two since he's not named after an element or elemental body like each of the 4 gods of Skypiea. But now for the main points. This name is also an Arabic or Kurdish name, typically a Muslim boy's name, which means rhythm, perfectly aligning it with Nika's rhythm with the drums of liberation, as well as Zaza's rain prayer rhythm. So there seems to be a motif of music surrounding each and every one of the gods in One Piece. And the second main point is that there is a Japanese musician of the same name, Dozan Fujiwara, who's known as the Prince of traditional Japanese music, so we can very comfortably double down on that theme of music. And one more time, I think Dozan is the God of War from the Void Century, if not the OG God of War, although there is a chance those two are one and the same. But one more thing is that this name does begin with a D, so even though we know absolutely nothing else about this character because the God of War stuff is still speculation at this point, even though it does seem very plausible, these very limited details of their name beginning with that specific letter and Emu dropping their name, meaning they probably are from the Void Century, that's enough for the time being until we learn more that maybe Dozan does have something to do with the will of D. There's a 99% chance this isn't the case, but it has to be mentioned just in case. And with the meaning of the name being rhythm and the connection to that Japanese musician, it's not impossible to say that this could also be the name of Joyboy himself, Dozan, and the will of D is his will, the will of Dozan. The two of them, Emu and Loki, then clash, and I said a few chapters ago when they clashed before that the reason we never saw a sky split is because of how high up they are, which is interesting now that we know Marijua is above the clouds as well. So remember when Zebek and Harald clashed in Marijua, the two absolute strongest characters in the story colliding, I think, minus Emu and Joyboy. I know there's some people who would put Loki above Harald as well, although in my opinion during the incident we clearly see Harald letting Loki hit him, and having an attack capable of killing Harald doesn't automatically make him stronger than Harald, you know? Like if Loki stood there not guarding himself at all, not defending himself at all, I'm more than sure Harald had an attack capable of killing Loki too. Anyway, Zebek and Harald, a clash so powerful that the Conqueror's Haki travelled 5 kilometers, and the reason why we never saw a sky split there is because they were already above the clouds. Now to the other side of the branch, which is in total chaos once again, we continue with Zoro and Sanji re-entering the fight themselves too, another indicator of round 3 beginning. Zoro running in Soma's direction while Sanji is headed to the western village to take on Killingham. The Giants aren't even putting a dent into the Zaza MMA. They can barely fight as it is because the village was supposed to be a kind of safe space, a recovery spot for the kids and the injured after the Domireversi Giants were defeated. So our first line of defense is made up of all the parents and family members who injured themselves on Soma's thorns to save their kids. Last chapter I said I came to the conclusion that the strength of the nightmare is dependent on the mind of the person it's being created from, because Killingham is a grown man with a full understanding of things like power and fear, and he would totally comprehend his own terror of the rain god, which is why that MMA is so strong as compared to the kids and their nightmares, because their fear it doesn't have the same magnitude as an adult's fear. Think Monsters Inc. and Monsters University. They scare kids who are young and still have impressionable minds, you know, they're easier to scare, but adults are off the table because they are way too difficult to scare, and when they do manage to scare a group of adults, it basically breaks the laws of scream energy in that universe. One scared kid can fill up one can, a scared group of adults and their screams can travel through a dimensional door and send an entire room full of cans into mayhem. An adult's fear is much more powerful than a child's fear, and this can be seen in story with the Loki and Nidhogg MMAs that are based on some of the kids' nightmares, which really aren't any different from the rest of the MMAs created from the kids' minds in terms of strength. So this Rain God MMA is super powerful even if it's not the real deal, and it's at the very end of this scene where Sanji appears in the western village to join the fight, although we cut away before we see any real action. Last chapter I was calling them the Rain God or Rain Goddess interchangeably because of their appearance, though Rain God is the actual name, and I'm mentioning this now because there are a few things that need to be clarified that will determine how well Sanji is going to be able to perform in this fight. Will his moral code allow him to fight in this situation? Because as we all know, Sanji doesn't hit women under any circumstances. Even if they're beating him, he won't fight back. So first is the appearance of the Rain God. They are very feminine, they have the appearance of a woman, so will that prove to be an issue for him? Does Sanji's philosophy extend to these kinds of creations, manifestations that aren't real beings? First, he needs to figure that out, that this is just a nightmare, it's just a figment of Killingham's mind, which might not be as easy as it sounds, because while the other MMAs have the childish, sketchy appearances, this Rain God MMA is by far the closest one to reality, to being real in terms of strength and appearance. Then after he figures it out, will the fact that Zaza is a woman stop him from attacking, even if it is only an MMA? I think it will. He won't be able to fight Zaza because Sanji's a gentleman, so while it is possible, I don't think he's going to allow an exception to his rule. And then the question becomes, how does he get around it? One way is that because this MMA is so powerful, it takes up too much of Killingham's stamina, so it falls apart on its own. I can see that happening, although it's a bit anticlimactic. And it's also assuming that the MMAs are still connected to Killingham after he creates them, and his own stamina is needed to keep them going, instead of him creating the MMAs and them being completely detached from him. They don't need his stamina, so they keep going until somebody else stops them. Another idea is that Sanji gets some support just for this and they take out Zaza on his behalf while he goes after Killingham. I can only think of Dory and Brogy as the only giants who I believe are still in the area and also capable of doing the job. Then this chapter takes a very unexpected turn, because even though I saw this coming eventually, I wasn't anticipating we would see it so soon considering everything else that's going on. Usopp asks Brook about why he suddenly went to confront and attack Gunko. Gunko is still frozen solid and Ragnir's ice is unscathed. Imu's attack didn't damage it at all, and Loki did say that only Ragnir himself could melt or thaw the ice, and Imu obviously knew that as well, because he barely glanced at Gunko when he launched the attack and kept flying before even seeing the result. So Brook gives a full explanation of what's been running through his mind, specifying she's not an enemy, which is a nice touch because of how complicated this is for him, even if he has grown to hate her for what he thinks she did. He says she left for the Holy Land, which implies that from his perspective it looked as though she left of her own free will, not kidnapped. So this scene where Brook watched her go, it's safe to say that Imu's control had already taken over. It's unclear if she was already Gunko in that moment or if she needed to be brainwashed over time, and he even says in this moment that he could distinguish between three clear personalities coming out of her. We know them to be Imu, Gunko and Shuri. I'm gonna say for now, Imu controlled Shuri to take her to Marijua, and the Gunko persona wasn't a thing yet. Like, Imu didn't already have another personality on standby to insert into Shuri's mind. Gunko was slowly born throughout her time by his side, and then we are launched into a new flashback following Brook's early life before piracy with Princess Shuri. I thought we were gonna get this flashback after the fighting was done, after Imu and the knights have left thanks to Imu's curse or their vulnerability, what Summers mentioned last chapter, with Gunko being left behind, and only then do we get this backstory. It's not an issue for me that we're getting it now. Maybe some people think that it's disrupting the action, which is fair, I do understand that, but it's not a problem for me personally. Though this placement is definitely interesting, kind of random, and I can only assume for now that with Loki still fighting alone against Imu at this moment, the end of this flashback is going to be bookended with Luffy actually joining the fight in the present. This is not gonna go for as long as Loki and Harald's backstory, by far the longest in the story, there's no way. But if we do stay here for an extended period of time, I'm saying it will be 5 chapters in length. Is that reasonable? Too short? Too long? Definitely less than 10. But the flashback begins before Loki was born. Garp, Roger, Whitebeard were all kids, and we start with the perfect indicator that this was during the good old days, because Brook singing is the rooster call to wake everybody up. He did the exact same thing with his crewmates on the Rumbar Pirates, only this is further back, and instead of one ship, his singing is waking up the entire kingdom. Also, it's a kingdom of instrumental craftsmen, so no wonder Brook loves music if this is where he came from. His singing comes along with the dawn, massive emphasis on that, because he also jumps up and strikes the nika pose with the sun rising behind him. It's a beautiful panel with the light shining onto the buildings, but I said as a kind of offhanded, semi-serious suggestion when Zaza's rain prayer rhythm was mentioned that the One Piece is a sheet of music because music is very important and relevant to the story. I'm doubling down on that idea. It's no longer semi-serious, it's now my favorite idea, my headcanon moving forward, that the One Piece is a sheet of music that Brook is going to play, the musician of the crew that Luffy always wanted, or at the very least wanted from the moment he set out from Fuchsia Village. It's not just a gimmick, it's not just to show Luffy's attitude and what he prioritizes, even though that's still the case. It's much more than that. Brook is much more than that, and the fact that we see him here singing to herald the dawn of the day while also striking the nika pose as he does it, not intentionally because he's not aware of the sun god, but he feels so free in this moment that he's subconsciously doing it. I also think he's going to, when we get there, herald in the dawn of the world. He's gonna play the One Piece, this sheet of music. He's done this pose before, by the way, back in the Fishman Island arc after the fight was done during the festivities. I did say before how that arc could have some really important hidden details. Then we see Brook when he was 20 years old, not wearing any glasses, so so we see his entire face for the first time, and he also doesn't have the scar on his head that he already had when we saw him in his first flashback with the Rumbar pirates. So we might see him get it here with this backstory. And Shuri, who later becomes Gunko under Imu's control, is 7 years old, making her 77 in the present day, and based on her appearance in the present, we can say Imu stopped her aging when she was also a young adult, late teens, early 20s maybe, so this backstory presumably will span across 10 to 15 years or somewhere within that range. That would put the timeline at 8 to as soon as 3 years before Brook's first death at age 38, so he would have joined or helped form that crew within that time as well, after the king's death and Shuri was taken. Actually, rather than 15 years, it's 14 years because this flashback begins 70 years ago, and 56 years ago, when Zebek invaded and infiltrated Pangaea Castle, Shuri was already there, seemingly already indoctrinated, so I think she was already Gunko by this point, meaning the incident with her and the king might have happened a couple years before this moment with Zebek. So quickly recapping what we do know about Brook's early life before even this point, even though up until now we barely know anything as it is regarding his life before the Rumbar pirates as a whole. He did receive some kind of education and already had a love for music when he was a kid, and based on the two main images we have of him as a kid, he seemed to have had a very poor upbringing, but eventually found himself in a much more comfortable position through merit assumedly and not favoritism, because we reached this point now 70 years ago where he's worked his way up to being the leader of a battle convoy in the kingdom which we finally learn the name of, being the Esperia Kingdom, or possibly the Hesperia Kingdom, because that is the name of beings from Greek mythology called the Hesperides, who are the nymphs of the evening and golden light of sunsets, or the nymphs of the west. And we know Brook is from the West Blue, meaning this kingdom is also located in the West Blue. The sunset stuff also does make me think there may be a connection to the sun god, but I haven't found anything else on the topic, so I'll just leave that detail there just in case. And I really enjoyed this interaction between Brook, Shuri and the king, who we know Brook has huge respect and admiration for, and when we learned about that in chapter 1173, I was anticipating this king to be a very well-dressed, soft-spoken, very approachable man, and now I see him, King Ruan, and he is none of those things. He's hairy, which isn't really an issue, but his body hair looks unkept, his stubble on his face is unkept, he's wearing only a vest under his royal cloak. He looks more like a poor man cosplaying as a king than an actual king, and it's really ironic that as messy as he looks, he's currently shearing some bushes to make sure they look good, to make sure those bushes are well kept. But remember, don't judge a book by its cover, looks can be deceiving, and if you want to get technical with it, you could say that the way he dresses may be symbolic of his personality. He doesn't see himself as above the average citizen, the common man. He's not above them, he's not having a servant clean the bushes, he's doing it himself. Possibly a very humble man. Back to this conversation though, Brook fawning over the queen, Shuri telling him off, the king half threatening him, Brook rejecting Shuri's marriage offer, you know, that kind of innocent comment from a kid who doesn't really understand marriage yet, and the king being pissed off at his daughter being rejected so casually. It's such a nice scene, really wholesome, and you basically learn all you need to know about their relationship, Brook, Shuri and the king, in about 2 pages. They are very close. Now going back to what Brook said to Gunko once he saw her full appearance after Imu took her over, he was very angry, saying he owed everything to her father, who he apparently saw her kill. We can say this is due to Imu's influence, but he has no way of knowing that. But we can also say that this man, the king, was probably the guy who took Brook off the streets, gave him a better life, and put him in a position where he could rise the ranks to be where he is here, leading a battle convoy whose job includes protecting the royal family. So Brook's role here is fighting for the man who saved him, and Shuri killing him, her father, also seems like the right time for him to have learned about the Holy Knight's existence, since in the present he's able to deduce Gunko is one of them, even though he doesn't tell quite yet that she is also Shuri, though he did seem to have his suspicions. We then hear about a gang who's planning to kidnap the queen, and I think there's going to be a lot more to this gang than we see in this chapter, because for one, they have a score to settle with the queen for deceiving their boss, but even more than that, gangsters in the West Blue. We have heard a lot about this before. We have Capone Gang Beige, one of the worst generation, and is a gangster from the West Blue, though him specifically we won't see because he's only 42 in the present, meaning he hasn't been born yet. Doesn't matter though, because we have a very good substitute, another pirate gangster, Don Marlon of the Rocks Pirates, who joined that crew 48 years ago, 22 years after this, 70 years ago, and when we meet him he already looks around 40 to 50 years old, so it's possible we see Don Marlon make an appearance in this backstory as well. So with this, Brook says he already dealt with them earlier in the day, giving him an opportunity to show off, because we see the infamous swordplay that he uses all the time in the present day, where his opponents don't even realize they've been cut, so Brook defeats the gangsters without any issue, and without even needing to be there. This has to be the longest interval between Brook launching the attack and the cuts landing. Usually it's a few seconds, this sounds like it's been a couple hours since he saw them them at the port. We are told there are two stars who shine the brightest in this kingdom, one of them being the queen, named Queen Candle, and she was the former leader of the convoy in the Esperia kingdom, so it's possible that Brook served under her before he became leader himself, meaning he would have had close ties to both the king and queen of this kingdom. Shuri's already 7 years old though, so Brook would have been 13 when she was born. Maybe he was already training to become a member of the convoy from that young age, even before then possibly. He was already close to the king and grew close to the future queen when she was still the leader of the convoy and he trained under her, so Brook might have known Shuri for her entire life from the moment she was born. Meaning while Brook wasn't royalty himself, he was basically an honorary member of the family. I'm gonna go with that for now. We'll see in next chapter if that's right or not. But the queen is the polar opposite to the king, very well dressed, very tidy, clean, beautiful, and honestly based on her appearance she would fit right in as a member of the Holy Knights. And that could be very telling because for some reason, and with what I said before about the king looking rough and maybe evil but actually being a very good man, I get slightly bad vibes from the queen at the moment. Based on first impressions, I feel like she is going to be very important with whatever happens to Princess Shuri. And the other star of this kingdom is obviously Brook, a celebrity on the level of the kingdom's royalty. Interesting how his music is unpopular though. Was there a time where his music wasn't as good, or was it just a very unique style, even for the people of this instrument crafting kingdom? So we have taken a very sharp turn here, moving away from the action and moving away from elbaf completely to jump into Brook's backstory with Gunko, Princess Shuri. I said before that I'm fine with getting into this now and I have no problems with it, but the placement is strange. We know this backstory somehow links to Imu and how he molds Shuri into Gunko. Why her specifically as well? What makes her so special? It genuinely might be the blue hair which reminds him of Lily, but we'll see. And to get this when Imu has just arrived on the island is a unique choice. The Loki Harald flashback did begin after Imu descended using Gunko's body, but that directly tied into this whole arc and how Imu specifically tied into this whole arc. Plus it did only end 12 chapters ago. Maybe we learned some really important details here that turn the tide of this fight one more time. Details that validate its inclusion here rather than after the fighting is done. Again, I doubt it's going to be too long. Kuma's backstory was only 8 chapters, so we don't necessarily need that many to tell an amazing story, but here we go. The second major backstory of the arc, Brook's backstory part 2.